but if we're talking about confidence intervals here, this is a 5. That means he's a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4, even with 6 teams off.
2 players in the last 20 years have been at least 220 pounds and run a 4.33 or faster. DK Metcalf, and yes, Isaac Guerendo.
Who are you guys benching Garrett Wilson for? Because like Chris said
Nick
a 5, I said a
Westbrook-Ikhine.
7. So we probably Westbrook. No way. I'm not benching Garrett Wilson for Nick Westbrook-Ikhine.
Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. And it's a great day to break down some of the biggest fantasy questions ahead of week 14. Gotta get those minds and rosters right, people. The playoffs are just around the corner after all, but I cannot accomplish this alone. And accordingly, I'm joined by the great Chris Allen as well as Dwain the Rock McFarland. Fellas, how's it going? Chris, man, it's like I saw you the other day.
I know, and I know for folks that are freaking out over their rosters, it's bi-apocalypse, injuries all over the place, and the fantasy playoffs right around the corner, but that's why you tune into us. We give you all the great insight so that your rosters are ready for the playoff push. But yeah, happy to be here.
Dwayne, I dropped Christian McCaffrey for Nick Westbrook-Ikhine in a league. That kind of sums up the season, I think.
Yeah, how did that feel? Was that like a tantalizing moment for you, or was it just kind of like a whimper, a little bit of a give up? You know, it's like, hey, it's all I can do. Yeah, that it's funny. The curveballs that life throws you, you know, you can learn from fantasy football because we've had so many curveballs this year. We get them every single year. I feel like every year is the year that, man, injuries this year were really like. And what's funny is this year I'm like, no, really, this year really the injuries were the worst. But yeah, just a lot of other crazy stuff as well, Ian, such as the year of the running back, not so much the year of the wide receiver. I know that's something that our own Pete Overzet touched on this morning in the Fantasy Life newsletter that, I quickly hit him up. So did our CEO, Elliot Chris. Like, great intro. Like, hadn't really taken a step back to think about this, but it was pretty interesting.
For those that haven't seen Pete's lovely intro, you can get it for free over at FantasyLife.com. But yeah, man, shout out to Pete and to Matt Harmon for supplying a pretty interesting stat, guys, because you do look at the first 13 weeks of 2023. We had Tyreek Hill going for 1,400 yards. CeeDee Lamb already had over 11. Same with Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, and Jamar Chase, even in 5th place, was still well over 1,000 yards. This year, we have Chase at 1,100. Jay Jettas is already over 1,000. Otherwise, that is it. So, Chris, man, really can't state enough how much it has been a bad year for wide receivers. You want to blame too high safeties. You want to blame injuries, whatever. But, man, 2024, year of the running back, Chris.
It's been really tough for the wide receiver position. And I think even worse for our purposes is that as some of our top end wide receivers have failed, it's not like there have been the wide receiver 2s coming in behind them that we can pick up and start. Because I know there are a number of folks that are upset about, let's say, Marvin Harrison Jr., and he's been more or less a bust from a fantasy standpoint. But as Marvin Harrison has failed, it's not like we've gone out to roster Michael Wilson. Greg Dortch has popped in and out of lineups for the few games here and there. Same thing for Jamar Chase. I mean, T. Higgins has missed 5 games so far this season, so it's not like he's been the most reliable guy. So on. I mean, the list goes on and on. So as our top-end wide receivers haven't been there for us, the wide receiver 2s that should have been there in order to pick up some of the slack haven't been there. So it's just made the whole position tough to roster throughout the entire year so that guys like Jerry Jeudy can pop up for these games and we start to look at them in a slightly different light. So 2025 is going to be just a free-for-all from an ADP standpoint. So I'm really interested to see how the market looks once we get into the offseason.
Speaking of that ADP, Dwayne, I got 2024s up right now. And the only 3 consensus first-round running backs are McCaffrey, Breece Hall, and Bijan Robinson. Yes, we would see Saquon or Jonathan Taylor, maybe your Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs creep into that back half. But a lot of drafts, especially in best ball land, were only those big 3. Do you see that number doubling for 2025, Dwayne? Because I know one thing we've talked about throughout the year is how much recency bias kind of goes on with decision-making in fantasy land. So you would think after a year like this, you know, the days of round 4, round 5 Joe Mixon probably coming to a close.
Yeah, it's hard to know how much this will move up. It will move, though, because to your point, recency bias, as much as, we try to do the research to help ourselves not do this, even we as analysts can fall into the trap of doing this, but I certainly think that there will be more running backs taken earlier next year. To what extent? Like, I think it is hard to say. I do think that as, a community, we've gotten so much better at fantasy football over the last 10 years. I think there will still be like this voice of calm in the storm that will probably keep it from getting too out of control. But like a guy like Saquon Barkley, that will be the most interesting, right? Because he's going to be an older player. He's probably going to go in the top 3 picks next year. Like, he's probably going to be the number 1 pick overall. If I had to choose right now who's going to be the number 1 pick, it will probably be Barkley. But I don't know if I have that much of a problem with that one, Ian, just because we know how run heavy the Eagles offense is. We know what a good offensive line, like all the mistakes that we probably made in our analysis. If we look at it and say, hey, how did the Barkley thing go wrong? And it all makes sense. It all makes sense, and it would make sense to probably bet on it again. So there are other guys where it's more of an outlier. Like, okay, is that really going to happen again? Is that really going to happen again? And then so some of those profiles we probably don't want to move to as far up the draft board. But yes, guys will certainly be going sooner. It will be very interesting to see how that all unfolds.
Look, run heavy offense, a proven talented back. I mean, just one of the best players at his position in the league. In a situation where we hadn't hit the age curve yet, like, of course, Jonathan Taylor wasn't going to bust this year, guys. So it's just one of those things, we'll continue to watch the film, try to get better and figure it out. But yeah, what a year so far for running back. So really, because we guys can probably figure out starting the show with this, didn't have any big news breaking on Tuesday before we get into the rest of things. Just a few items, though. Speaking of running backs, the 49ers did go ahead and claim former Jets RB Israel Abanikanda off of waivers, in addition to Keyshawn Vaughn, formerly of the Bucs. So yeah, not making big moves. Still expecting Isaac Guerendo and Patrick Taylor to be the 1-2, but that is now their new and definitely not improved running back room. Also at wide receiver, we have Packers wide receiver Romeo Doubs, still limited with that concussion, and the Broncos released wide receiver Josh Reynolds right as he was about to come back from the IR. Only other news, worthy of talking about is the NFL suspended Titans safety Julius Wood for the next 6 games for PEDs. Can't do that. So guys, that was the news. And now a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Grab your favorite team's jersey and some snacks and head to the couch for another Sunday of action-packed football. You can even get closer to the action with my partners at DraftKings because, guys, right now, all new DraftKings customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using the promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. That's right. New customers get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins after betting just $5. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry, you can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use the promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. It's time for Throwing Shade, presented by the fine folks over at Knock Around, where we're going to potentially throw some shade at some of the biggest Week 13 performers, or maybe determine that, hey, these guys were not frauds. It is actually a sign of even bigger and better things to come. So, guys, want to start off with Steelers QB1 Russell Wilson, who actually finished as Fantasy's QB3 last week. Only Joe Burrow is averaging more passing yards per game than dangerous at this point in the season. What a time to be alive. Dwain, Fugazi, or is this just, the new reality in our life?
No, I think it is the new reality. I mean, we've got 6 games now. He's averaging 271 yards per game. Now, not as many passing touchdowns as a guy like Joe Burrow, right? So we're sitting here at 10 over the last 6 weeks for Mr. Russell Wilson. But still, like, he's got double-digit touchdown passes in 3 out of his 6 starts. He's thrown for over 260 yards in 4 out of his 6 starts. So that's pretty good, man. That's what a borderline QB1 looks like. Now, he's a borderline QB1 and not anything higher than that, because that part of his game that we used to love so much, the rushing ability, we're not seeing that anymore. He's not that it might not be in there somewhere, but they're not using it. He's not scrambling. They don't really use him in the design run game. He gets a carry here or there. When they want to use that sort of, when they want to go to that sort of package, they're bringing Justin Fields onto the field. So yeah, he's a pure passer at this point. So that puts him down there in a range with like the guys, and it comes down to matchups really, Ian. We've got a pretty big tier of guys that I would say are borderline QB1s, and it depends on what the matchup looks like each week. basically like, do you get to play the Jaguars this week? And if so, and you're in this tier, like you move into the QB1 conversation. But Russ is in that, so he's in there with guys like Matthew Stafford, since he's gotten both of his weapons back. I would say him and Russ are very comparable. Tua Tagovailoa and the run that he's gone on over the last several weeks. I would put Tua slightly ahead because we've seen Tua have these big prolific passing games for the last 3 years, whereas Russ is more of a resurgence this year. We would get him on and off like over the last couple of years in Denver, much more consistent for Tua. So, but right there on the cusp of being in the same tier as a guy like that. So good passing offense, not quite that good on the ground as far as using their legs. But yes, when you get the right matchups, you can use these guys. Plays the Browns this week. You got 6 teams on bye. Ian, I think we, as a consensus, I think we all have him in the top 12. I have him QB 10.
I have him QB 12, so we are right there on the same page. Dwain, Chris, 2 guys, though, that I actually have ranked ahead of Russ that Dwain has ranked behind, Jordan Love and Patrick Mahomes. Who would you rather start out of that trio?
I think Russ kind of falls into that tier where I probably go with Russ a bit more than those other guys. Just looking at the matchup, he did perform at least decently against the Browns a couple weeks ago, and that was even in the snow. To Dwayne's point, I'd say my only concern is, as Dwayne noted, the lack of rushing and scrambling for Russ even before their game against the Bengals just this past weekend. Bottom 5 sack rate for Russell Wilson. So even if the passing game still continues to be there for him, I mean, that is one of those potential limiters for his upside moving forward. So while I'd say that I wouldn't call it a fugazi. I think he is properly ranked for this week or anything along those lines, or I don't want to call him a fraud or anything like that. But I mean, looking at his next couple of matchups, and also has the Eagles on the schedule in the near future as well. So a couple of matchups ahead of him that will maybe limit his upside. Don't think we can expect him to eclipse 400 passing yards or add to his career stats or anything along those lines. But for Russ specifically, looking at him in that back end of the QB1 range seems fair with the way he's been playing so far.
Certainly is playing a bit of a boom or bust brand of football, mostly booms recently. But yeah, guys, limited to under 30 pass attempts in 4 of his 6 starts this season. God forbid that efficiency does start to drop off a little bit. Going to be tough to keep up again against some of those better defenses that Chris just brought up. Let's stick with the Steelers, though, as we transition over to running backs, because Najee Harris, fresh off an overall RB3 finish in Week 13. Dwayne, he has at least 16 touches in every game this season, but not facing a Browns defense that held him to just 2.6 yards per carry all the way back in Week 12.
Yeah, I mean, the 24.9 points is a fugazi. Like, we've seen this enough. You mentioned it. The utilization's good. Like, he's getting at least 16 touches every game. So he is a player you can continue to start, but he's more of a mid-range to low-end running back, too. We've seen that all season now, averaging 13.4 fantasy points per game. So not getting up there into that 17, 18 range, which is what we think about as like a high-end running back one, right? What they're averaging for a season. Like, the best running backs are going to average over 20 fantasy points. But like the guys we really love, they're typically helping us win our leagues, they're averaging 17, 18 points. So Najee's not in that conversation. We've got enough volume here on the record for the season to see that probably was an outlier game. But again, still a player that you're going to be starting. You know, if you've got him on your fantasy roster, he's a solid running back 2, but not the running back 1 we saw last weekend.
Dwayne's RB14, my RB19 right now. Chris, like, how do you kind of, I guess, just go between guys like Najee Harris and your Rico Dowdles, Tony Pollards of the world, where, yes, Najee probably has a higher, overall floor here. We trust the Steelers' top 10 scoring offense, but just in terms of pure utilization, who has that 3-down role, guys like Dowdle, Connor, and Pollard probably taking the cake.
Yeah, I think so, because for Najee specifically, he falls into more of those matchup-based starters where in a game where you're playing against the Bengals, one of the worst run defenses in the league, you can see the path for him having multiple touches from inside the 5, inside the 10, those money touches that we need for fantasy production. And that's what we got last week. But in tougher matchups where his efficiency might be tied to a more, let's say an up and down, boom bust type of play or quarterback in Russell Wilson, like we were just talking about, out, that's where his ceiling might get capped a bit more. So for Najee Harris and his usage so far, I mean, Dwain pointed out, I mean, he's had like one of the better usage rates like for a running back. But I think overall, looking at that entire offense, if they do start to sputter once they get between the 20s, something along those lines, it is a bit tougher to project Najee really getting into that top tier of running backs on a week in, week out basis. But I will say this, over the past 3 weeks, running backs for the Steelers have been seeing a few more targets. I think in the last like 3 weeks or so, they've gotten about like a third of Russ's targets over the last like 3 games so far. I mean, Harris averaging around 4 targets per game, and the same thing with Jalen Warren as well. So it's just if Russ is starting to use his running backs and tight ends a bit more, we could see a bit more volume funneled to guys like Najee Harris. It's just that overall, like if the rushing production starts to falter with some of the tougher matchups, just noted them going up against the Browns, Eagles over the next couple of weeks, he does still kind of sit in that RB2 mid to low end range, like RB2 range, just given the matchups.
Another high-end RB1 performance unlikely, but again, yes, mid-tier RB2, someone who should still probably be in more fantasy lineups than not. Don't think we can make the exact same sentiment for our wide receiver, who we are fraud checking. Jaguars now, wide receiver 2, Parker Washington, fresh off a wide receiver 7 overall finish in week 13. Obviously, Dwain, none of us are expecting another top 10 encore or anything this week against the Titans, but as you know, a player who I'm sure a lot of listeners went out there and picked up on the waiver wire, what is your confidence level with throwing him in the flex spot, at least for this matchup?
What do I know? Nick Westbrook-Ikhine has 8 touchdowns on 20 receptions. I mean, apparently it's the year that I know absolutely nothing. But yeah, looking at a guy like Parker Washington, obviously he stepped into a larger role with Gabe Davis out for the season. Christian Kirk obviously lost before that. So he's got a starting role. The routes are going to be there. I did go back and look at last year after the Jaguars lost Christian Kirk, and they also had Zay Jones on their roster at that time. And he was battling injuries throughout the year. And he did have a little brief moment where he popped up with a 23% targets per route run in week 15. Remember, Christian Kirk got hurt last year in week 13. So shortly after that, but then he just kind of fell off again. This is a 6th-round wide receiver. So we've got to give him credit, Ian, that he came out last weekend. You know, it's his 2nd year in the league. You never want to give up on a player like that whenever they're that young. He had a big week, but it's really hard to be that confident in him. This is obviously a fugazi from a standpoint of, is he going to be a wide receiver 1 the rest of the way? Like, I think we can easily bet against that. Like, could he? Yeah. There's an outlier chance that like he's the guy instead of Brian Thomas Jr. the rest of the way in Jacksonville. But I would say you're probably looking at more of a wide receiver 4. So with as many teams as we have on bye, that still just makes him a borderline start this week. Like I had a tough time looking at him, like figuring out like how high can I get this player? Even with 6 teams on bye, I'm not confident in getting him into lineups. He could come through, but he could also easily be a dud. It could just all go through Evan Ingram as well as Brian Thomas Jr., who had another really big week that could have been bigger, even per the Sheesh report. Great job by you, Ian. So I think it's still a bit crowded for an offense where I don't feel great about the quarterback, Mac Jones, for me to be looking at the guy that I still think, if we're making a bet on the rest of the season, is the 3rd option in the offense.
My wide receiver 39 on the week. Dwain's wide receiver 44. Yeah, not exactly someone who needs to be jammed into lineups. And as our YouTube fam can see with this handy dandy graphic, 118 total receiving yards in weeks 1 through 12 combined before 103 last week. So Chris, on our Monday episode, you went a bit off the rails talking about Marquez Valdes-Scantling finishing as a top 24 wide receiver the rest of the way. Who'd you rather start this week, MVS or Parker Washington?
Oh, that's a good question. Honestly, I probably would still go with MVS just with the limited options for Derek Carr and company, because as Dwain noted, I mean, Parker Washington winding up being the potential 3rd option in a Mac Jones, potentially. We'll see if Trevor Lawrence makes it back after the nasty hit that he took on Sunday. But in a Mac Jones-led offense, I think it's a little tougher to swallow than whereas MVS, we know how he would wind up making his production. I mean, it's going to be a 15 to 20 air yard bomb down the sideline. He winds up getting into the end zone. I mean, that's how we can see MVS like making his hay from a fantasy standpoint. But but for Parker Washington, I would like the way he was used on the field is somewhat encouraging. I mean, yeah, can we expect him to get around 30% of the targets off of a 1-game sample? No. But the fact that he was used on more timing routes, a lot of them were some out routes, some hitches, comeback routes. I mean, things that require some level of synchronicity with your quarterback. And this is your backup quarterback too, because over half of his targets were with Mac Jones in the field. So it was somewhat promising to see that that's where he was at and what his usage was looking like. But I'm with both of you. But having Brian Thomas Jr. out there on the field, Evan Ingram on the field, I mean, even Travis Etienne or Tank Bigsby also as options. Expecting Parker Washington to pop up for another solid game in this week, especially going up against the Titans defense, which for the most part, when they haven't faced Jaden Daniels, have played fairly well from a defensive standpoint. Hard to expect that same type of production in week 14.
Fellas, let's close things out with a look at our fraud check tight end. None other than the reigning fantasy tight end one, Sam LaPorta, fresh off another top 8 finish, Dwayne. He has now had 3 of those in the last 5 weeks. That said, now on Thursday night, facing the same Packers defense that held him to just 28 scoreless yards a few short weeks ago. So, situation where, we started to see the volume increase a little bit, Dwayne, but at the same time, maybe on a bye, all the bye weeks going on, we can get him inside that top 8 again. But rest of the way, man, still think I could probably name 8 or 9 tight ends I'd rather have.
Yeah, I think he's a low-end tight end one. He does have a nice little trend going on over like the last 5 or 6 games, but you have to isolate it down to really the last 3 because that's whenever we got Jamison Williams back in week 10. Remember, we had that 2-game stint there where we didn't have Jamo in the lineup due to the suspension. So over these last 3 games, 26% target share, and that was in a game where he got hurt. He was about to go completely nuclear in that game, but ended up with only a 61% route participation because he left the game late in the third quarter. Next game, 16%. Next game, 17% target share. So over the 3 games, 19%. That's good enough to be a low end tight end one in a nice offense like we get with the Lions. There's always going to be a chance for Sam LaPorta to score that touchdown, but he has really turned into this touchdown dependent sort of player, Ian. When we have the games where he gets the touchdown, it's worth having him in your fantasy lineup. He doesn't get the touchdown, he really is hurting you. And it's been really as simple as that, which is sad to see, because this is one of those tight ends that last year he was more like a wide receiver. He was like having a wide receiver 2 and getting to play them, or really a wide receiver 1 and getting to play them in the tight end position. This year, you're getting that from Brock Bowers. You're getting that from George Kittle. You're getting that from Trey McBride here recently. But Sam LaPorta nowhere near that conversation. Unfortunately, just a crowded offense for the Lions. And we know, man, any given Sunday, they can decide they're just going to pound the rock all the way. I mean, we got two running backs over there, right, that are on pace to get over 1,000 yards. So, I mean, we've just got a situation where the Lions have too many weapons and they're just too diverse. There's too many different ways they can game plan to win.
Pretty much consensus top 7 tight ends in our ranks: Bowers, McBride, Jonnu, Kittle, Kelsey, Njoku, and Hawkinson. After that, we do start getting to that low-end tight end one, almost touchdown-dependent tier that Dwayne was talking about. Kate Otten, Evan Ingram, Tucker Kraft, Sam LaPorta, Juwan Johnson, and Will Dissly, amongst others. Chris, let's stick with this Thursday night matchup. Tucker Kraft or Sam LaPorta?
I think I'd go Tucker Kraft, honestly. That's just my knee-jerk reaction. But let's see what if Romeo Doubs winds up making it out of the concussion protocol. So if there are fewer options for Jordan Love in the passing game, I might lean in the direction of Tucker Kraft. But if Romeo Doubs is active, I can see the case for Sam LaPorta. But I mean, your point earlier, and also Dwayne noted it as well, the touchdown dependency for Sam LaPorta, that was something that folks noted coming out of his rookie campaign. I mean, 10 touchdowns on the season. I think that led the position, or fairly close to it. And seeing his drop off from a fantasy standpoint, it kind of makes sense. Like with Jamison Williams popping up for like 20+% target share on the season, Khalif Raymond, Tim Patrick, some of those other guys like pitching in here and there from targets, and of course the Sun God getting his. And if the last couple of weeks with Amon-Ra St. Brown getting that knee injury that he sustained a couple of weeks ago, still out there on the field, but seeing fewer looks. I mean, if LaPorta can only muster around like a 16-17% target share in those 2 games without having Amon-Ra at his best, I think that is kind of the indicator as to where he's at in this pecking order. So I would say low-end tight end 1, because we know that he's a part of a good offense, still is getting used regularly, but just not at the same rate as last year. So I feel like back end of the tight end 1 ranks makes perfect sense for where he's at right now.
Kraft, LaPorta. Personally, I lean a little bit with LaPorta, but you know what, guys? We should just be thankful. There's another freaking Thursday night banger out here with the Packers again, visiting the Lions. Slowly but surely, maybe becoming the superior prime time product. Just saying. Don't shoot the messenger. But something else that is awesome are these knockaround sunglasses that we have been rocking for the last 10 or so minutes. And you can go find some for yourself over at knockaround.com. Truly cannot say enough good things about them. Yeah, they're a sponsor of the show, but I kid you not, guys. Once we found out the news, Dwayne and I were like, that's fantastic because we already own all these pairs of knockarounds anyways. So again, polarized lenses for less than $50. It's high quality for a low price, which has made me a loyal and returning customer literally for the last decade plus. So UV 400 protection for your eyes. And as you can see, the Seahawks shades I'm rocking right now, they do have an officially licensed NFL collection. Even get yourself a cool little carrying bag along the way, so you don't scratch up these glorious shades for your eyeballs. So again, guys, knockaround.com, polarized lenses for less than $50. Make sure you use code LIFE for free shipping, only at knockaround.com. All right, fellas, usually in this episode, we go through some bigger arching questions, but it's week 14. We need to win this one to get into the playoffs. So going to be a bit more player specific than usual. And accordingly, let's get at it with the waiver wire king of the week, 49ers RB1 and now Isaac Guerendo. Dwayne, going up against a Bears defense that has been good throughout most of the season. However, maybe a bit stronger against the pass than they have been the run. What is your confidence level with Guerendo facing the Bears?
Yeah, the Bears actually are one of the better matchups for running backs. Top 8 as far as whenever you look at our DVP tool and you look at the fantasy boost allowed to the running back position, 3.6 points per game over their opponent's average. So anytime you see a positive number in that column over in the DVP tool, that's really good. Obviously, the bigger the number, the better. Now, it's not an outlier good defense like the Panthers giving up a boost of 8.8. We're not in that territory, but still, it's a plus matchup. And we've also got the fact that Isaac Guerendo, Ian, the last time we saw him in a near full-time role, we have to go back to week 8. If you remember, Jordan Mason got hurt early in that game, so the role would have been even larger, but he ended up with 47% of the rushing attempts that game. Guerendo posted 19.2 fantasy points. I think the real question is, how good do you feel about this version of the 49ers offense? They've obviously just not been as strong as what we have seen in previous years, but I don't know about you guys. I feel like at any moment they could really snap back. So whenever I think about a confidence interval, lucky you guys, we already have rankings up. And whenever you look at guys that are high-end running back 1s, mid-range running back 1, low-end running back 2, all those sort of things, I just kind of plotted it out. So if we're talking about a confidence interval of 1 to 10, I would put Guerendo at a 7.5, Ian. I've got him as a mid-range running back 2 this week, just because there's a little bit of unknown of how they'll handle it. All signs seem like they're going to have to feed this guy, but it is Kyle Shanahan. He does weird things sometimes. We got the signing of Israel Abanikanda, so he probably is probably not going to be ready. But Patrick Taylor is going to get called up from the practice squad. He could get a few of the carries. So it kept me from going all in this week. But mid-range running back 2 on a week where we've got 6 buys, you're probably starting him if you have him, is what I would be saying. But you're a little bit higher than me. You had him more of a high-end running back 2, which would make you a confidence interval of an 8.5 or a 9 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Don't put confidence intervals in my mouth, Dwayne. Come on, man. But yes, he is my RB. He is my RB14, Dwayne's RB19. It was just one of those things, man, where Dwayne, I headed over to FantasyLife.com, use your handy-dandy utilization tools. And when we did have the game against the Cowboys where Mason got knocked out pretty early with the shoulder injury, I was surprised to see Guerendo, well north of 60% with his route rate. And that's where I do think it could arguably be an even more fantasy-friendly role than what Mason was having. And maybe they start getting Debo more involved in the ground again, but that hasn't been the case for a good 3 weeks now. I mean, Chris, at the end of the day, I would be surprised if we see Guerendo getting under 15 combined, carries and targets out there. Yes, the offense isn't quite the same powerhouse we've seen in past years, but to Dwayne's point about the defense, man, 22nd Bears in terms of EPA per rush and fantasy points per game allowed to the position. So just a situation where I'm looking at Rico Dowdle and I'm looking at Tyrone Tracy, even Tony Pollard and these guys, I just feel like I don't want to be a week late in Isaac Guerendo. I'm starting the man right now.
Yeah, definitely start the man. And I would say for like Rico Dowdle's case, he also has the opportunity and the matchup that would also put him in the same, I would say in the same tier for me as compared, like from a running back standpoint. But let's look at the situation for Guerendo. He has the game environment in front of him that would enable a high-end RB2, potentially knocking on the door of an RB1 status at the end of week 14, going up against the Bears. Third most rushing yards allowed per game over their last 6 games, around like 150, 160 per game so far. And also looking at their last 5 games, only one running back that's faced them so far like didn't get into double digits. That was Ramondre Stevenson. But even in that game against the Patriots, Drake May was mixing in for around 40 yards. Was it Antonio Gibson also got around like 40 yards as well. The team got up over 140 rushing yards against the Bears. So he has the defensive matchup. So that's one out for him. Second out, I mean, you guys both noted, I mean, they bring in Izzy Abanikanda. There's no real expectation for him to mix in for a ton of touches in this game. Of course, they can give some to Patrick Taylor. We know like the juice will probably be loose on the field at some point throughout the game as well. But we can at least expect Isaac Guerendo to have most of the carries. That's out 2. Out 3, I mean, Ian, you just mentioned it. The route share and also potential target share for Guerendo. I mean, 17% target share, like in that week 8 game. I mean, that's more than what we've seen out of Jordan Mason so far throughout most of the season. And it gives them at least that out where that's what we wanted to see from Jordan Mason in the earlier parts of the season, as we've seen from Christian McCaffrey historically. So if he's going to get most of that workload, and again, just this 1 week, we'll see how the rest of the rotation works out over the back end of the playoffs. And he has multiple outs in order to get there if you are in those PPR or half-point PPR leagues. So I think Isaac Guerendo, mid-range to high-end RB2. I think my confidence level is around like a 7.58 as well, along with Dwain. So I think if you got him, if you wound up dropping most of your fab in order to get him, he should be in your starting lineup for week 14.
Feeling good about him. And if we haven't convinced you yet, people, last note, 2 players in the last 20 years have been at least 220 pounds and run a 4.33 or faster. DK Metcalf and, yes, Isaac Guerendo. Shout out Dane Brugler for that poll. So, yeah, he's big and fast in an offense that we generally like with a good matchup. You know, fantasy doesn't always have to be that hard. Let's talk about another running back, though, because, Chris, you mentioned it. Rico Dowdle is checking a lot of nice boxes this week. And, Chris, you know as well as anyone that Bengals defense is a group we like to target. And lo and behold, we do have the Cowboys facing off against the Bengals on Monday night.
Yeah, and honestly, over I would say almost the last 2 months, like the only running back not to finish with double-digit fantasy points against the Bengals was Alexander Mattison. And so if we're looking at a guy in Rico Dowdle where he doesn't have Zeke really to worry about, Hunter Luepke is really the only other running back of note that's getting in sort of fantasy-related type of situations, because Luepke does get mixed in during the 2-minute drill. And we've seen target shares for Dowdle of over 10% in 4 of his last 5 games, while he's secured a majority of the rushing touches. And yep, I could already see it that, yeah, the Bengals, their offense is going to make it a competitive game, but with the defense playing so bad, I mean, how many times are we going to see Rico Dowdle get into the end zone? I'm saying at least once. I'm thinking at least once, but for fantasy managers, I'm thinking it's probably going to be a couple of times that Dowdle winds up being on one of the highlights for the Cowboys this weekend.
I mean, Dwayne, is one of those situations where, no, there's not much we've been able to trust in Dallas this season as a whole, and especially with Cooper Rush under center, but they have been playing relatively better. And I mean, when you look at the Bengals, only the Ravens this year have actually scored more total points and also allowed more total points than the Bengals. So it's this fantasy-friendly, matchup we have week in and week out, where we know Burrow and company are going to put up a lot of points, and lo and behold, this is one of the worst defenses in the league. They're probably going to allow a lot too.
Yeah, but it could be a bad situation for Dowdle, like if we're just talking about the negatives, because, I mean, the Cowboys are 6-point dogs. The Bengals offense has been very good. I don't think the Cowboys offense can keep up, so that could be a situation that takes touches away from Dowdle. I will say right now I've got Dowdle 1 spot ahead of Isaac Guerendo in the ranks. I think if you're just looking for a pure floor, probably a little bit safer with Dowdle, because we know that he's been getting those touches like Chris was just alluding to over the last 2 games, over 70% of the team's rushing attempts. So we know he's going to get the carries. It's a matter of how many carries are going to be available to go around. I think the Bengals are going to cover the spread against the Cowboys. I know the Cowboys have been, they're feisty. No, they're not. They're not feisty. Joe Burrow is about to obliterate the Dallas Cowboys. So I think if you're looking for a floor, you can feel better about knowing that Dowdle's going to get whatever touches are available than Guerendo. But if you're looking for the ceiling, I'm with you, Ian. Like if we're to say, hey, we could look up and you and I are doing our Sunday night show, doing the recap, and one of these two players went off for 35 points. There's no way I'm saying it's Dowdle. It's Guerendo, right? Now, Guerendo's also the one that we can be like, what happened, dude? 35% of the carries? Like, that could happen to Isaac Guerendo. I think it's going to be tough, though, because they've got so many injuries. So I'm going to move Guerendo above of Dowdle. I'm going to move him above because you got to swing for the fences, man. You don't want to go out with a whimper trying to get into your fantasy playoffs, or if you're already in your fantasy playoff matchup. I want to play the guy that gives me the best chance to crush my opponent, and I do think that's Guerendo.
And remember, that Cowboys-Bengals matchup is still on Monday Night Football because I kid you not, it was not eligible to be flexed out because of all the drawings, voiceovers, and work that went to the Simpsons alternate cast that will be airing that evening. So, yeah, only in 2024 NFL land. So feeling good about Guerendo. Again, a little bit more iffy with Dowdle this week. Let's talk about, though, guys, a wide receiver who we could have talked about with Fraud Check because he went absolutely off last week, but now we're talking about him now, so it's all good either way. Adam Thielen against the Eagles, Dwain, a situation where Bryce Young is playing better, albeit, you can look at the advanced stats. He's been a good average, maybe even above average quarterback. Still not seeing multiple touchdowns, though, and still not seeing these 300-yard booms by any stretch. So when we do see, an Eagles defense that really has risen up to the top of the league ever since returning from their bye, do you think Bryce can keep the good times rolling this week, Dwain?
I think it's going to be tough, man. You've got 6 teams on bye, so there's a chance you have to use a guy like Thielen. But if we're talking about confidence intervals here, this is a 5. That means he's a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4, even with 6 teams off. Now, Thielen does play a position that can be a little bit insulated from the better coverage players on the Eagles, so I think there's a chance like he could still come through with just the catches. But you're trying to also think of, okay, what's the potential ceiling scenario for a guy like Thielen this week? And I think it's pretty limited because of what you talked about, Ian. If you look at the Eagles, they're now looking like one of the absolute – actually, they are now – actually, over this last 2 games, they've now moved into the toughest matchup for wide receivers per our DVP tool, minus 4 points below. So 4 points below what teams have averaged on the season when they face off against the Eagles for their wide receiver core. So this is a legit defense playing against still a very questionable offense. We like what Bryce Young's done over the last few games. We want to for sure give the guy credit, looking like he's playing a little bit better, but man, this is just an absolute buzzsaw situation here. So normally, like if this was a neutral matchup, I think we'd probably be saying, hey guys, Thielen's more like a confidence interval 6, 6.5. If you got to use him, use him. But because of the matchup, man, it still makes it a really tricky play.
Yeah. And not even just wide receiver specifically, it's overall, guys. I mean, we got the graphic up right now. Since that week 5 bye, first in yards allowed per game, first in yards allowed per play, second in points per game, and pretty much any EPA stat you want to look at. I mean, the Eagles have allowed 241 total yards per game since week 6. The next best defense is the Lions at 306, Chris. So it really has been a massive gap between the Eagles and everyone else. And yes, the week 13 boom for Thielen, wide receiver 5 was nice, but we can go back 1 week, man, and find him finishing as a wide receiver 46. So nice little story here going for the Panthers, Chris. But again, tough to be overly optimistic, and really anyone.
Right, because if it's not just the secondary portion of the Eagles defense, which I'll get to that in just a second, but it's also their defensive front. How much pressure is Bryce Young going to be under like during this game? And while he has been scrambling a bit more, being able to evade like the first defender and get the ball downfield, and we just saw it in that last second touchdown to Thielen in this the last week's game against the Bucs. And they have the Eagles have both the guys up front and the guys behind him in order to really like help them out like should Bryce Young like shake free. But for slot receivers, and that's where Adam Thielen likes to play, coverage should allow him some layup targets. So in PPR leagues, he does have that floor type of case that you would want if you have to wind up starting him this week. But man, I think Cooper DeJean and whomever else like has been had to guard the slot, they've been shutting a lot of good players down. I mean, Zay Flowers just this past week, 1 target from the slot, 0 catches. CeeDee Lamb, when they played against him, 3 catches for 4 yards from the slot. Jamar Chase, 5 catches for 30 yards. These are like legitimate receivers that have gone to the interior, have not not been able to perform as well as we have expected them against some of the softer coverages that you would expect from interior defenders. So with Adam Thielen popping up for around like 26% of the targets just this past week, so the volume should be there for him. I would say he's more of a floor play in this one. So yeah, my confidence for this game around here, around a 4-3-4, somewhere in there, because it's not just for Thielen and his workload, but it's also for Bryce Young and how he's going to be able to operate with the Eagles bearing down on him with that Vic Fangio defense.
Dwain's wide receiver 36 on the week. I'm wide receiver 38. Freeman, wide receiver 39. So same page. Again, hardly someone who needs to be jammed in the lineups, but hey, still feeling better about this Panthers offense than we did a few short weeks ago. And for that, we thank you, Mr. Bryce Young. So guys, some more tougher start-sit questions along the way. But first, a quick word to our friends over at Game Time. Dwain and Chris, we all know there's nothing quite like being at a game in person. We were actually joking around before the show about the potential for Urban Meyer to fill the Bears' job, and that's a joke. That's not going to happen. I understand it. But one of the last NFL games I went to was actually that game before the infamous bar scene went down in Cincinnati when the Jaguars traveled up there on Thursday night. Game-winning field goal by the Bengals. It was a great atmosphere, man. Any primetime game, and, always going to have a special place in my heart for Cincinnati after spending 2 great years of my life there. Quit laughing, people. Ohio is awesome, and I will not hear any slander otherwise. But anyway, even if you're not in Ohio, guess what? There's games everywhere, and there's shows and concerts everywhere, and Game Time is going to be your source to get great tickets to all the above. It's certainly my go-to for finding amazing tickets, and again, not just for sports, but also for concerts and shows too. That's right, Dwain. I know that you got a certain daughter who just loves to go see Broadway shows now, so you should be using Game Time to get your best prices there. And I was actually scrolling through the Game Time app the other day and came across this new feature called Game Time Picks, an absolute game changer, gentlemen. Game Time Picks curates your experience, showing you the best deals on great seats, and they make it so easy. It is a no-brainer, people. Seriously, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. All you have to do to find it out for yourself is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, guys, all you have to do is create an account over on the Game Time app and redeem code LIFE for $20 off. Download Game Time today, because what time is it? Game time. Love me some Game Time, and love me some Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, Dwain. You can slander the man all you want, but we all know he's going to go out there, lace up his cleats, put on his shoulder pads, and catch touchdowns. And this week he has a better chance of any of doing that against this Jaguars defense that has been, bar none, easily the worst against the pass all season long. So now it would be fitting to see someone, flirting with such extreme, touchdown rates out here to finally bust in the good matchup. But something you did bring up, on the Sunday night pod, Dwain, as much as it's easy to look at the touchdowns and the receptions, ratio and say there's no way this can keep up, we have started to see Westbrook-Ikhine's utilization, specifically his targets, move in the right direction as well.
Yeah, I mean, he took over a full-time role once DeAndre Hopkins was moved to the Chiefs, and since then, he has slowly improved his target share as well. So, I mean, we have to give him credit for that. Over the last 4 games, he's sitting at a 19% target share, which puts him into a range where, we've got a lot of wide receiver threes over the history of fantasy football that have been right there in that 18 to 21% range, especially if there's someone that can come through with big plays on the deep ball, and that is what we've really seen from Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Can he keep up this pace? Look, I'm not even going to say he can't anymore, but just because random stuff happens. It's the NFL. We get absolute chaos. I would say, is it likely to still continue to have a ratio of 8 touchdown catches on 20 receptions? No, probably not. But am I going to bet on it stopping this weekend against the Jaguars? No, I'm not, because they give up 40 yards over what wide receivers as a group for the opposing teams have averaged. That's the third best mark, or that's the second best mark in the NFL. If you look at the DVP tool, 6.1 fantasy points over expectation as far as what they've allowed looking at their opponents. So it's the third best matchup for wide receivers. Westbrook-Ikhine's been feeling good. Will Levis has actually been playing pretty good over the last 3 to 4 games. So yeah, I've got him right there in that same range as Adam Thielen. But I definitely think that he has more ceiling than Thielen.
Yeah.
Right now, I think I have him 2 spots behind Thielen in the ranks, Ian. So again, borderline wide receiver 3 territory, but there's much more boom potential here with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. I think they both have bust potential, so I probably need to flip the 2 in the ranks, to be honest, now that I'm sitting here thinking it through. So we'll go with NWI for the win here if you're looking for some upside and you got a borderline call.
Obviously, Chris, Calvin Ridley's still the number 1 in Tennessee, but with Will Levis playing better, maybe seeing some better just schematic, principles coming out of Tennessee as a whole, we can feel good about exploiting this matchup. That, again, guys, I cannot state how great of a spot this is. We have a chart that will pop up here showing, a defense's EPA allowed per pass versus per run, and like they are skewing the entire thing with how far left they are compared to every other team. I mean, that is ridiculous, Chris. So if there was a week to believe in our guy NWI, my God, it's this one.
Yeah, it has to be for this one because to Dwayne's point earlier, I mean, if you like targets, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine has been at or around 20% of the team's targets in 3 of his last 5 games. If you like air yards, around a third of the team's air yards over his past 3 games as well. But I think the problem with the volatility, and Dwayne noted it earlier about like how often he's been coming down with touchdowns, is how he gets used when he's on the field. I mean, out of his 22 targets over his past 3 games, 6 of them have been on go routes and 3 of them have resulted in touchdowns. So it's just he's streaking down the field and being targeted on some of those deep catches that we really can't rely on a week-to-week basis. I mean, you wouldn't try and project that over a season-long standpoint. But, I mean, looking at Jacksonville, they have allowed the 5th highest explosive passing rate. That's through over the entire season. And with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, averaging in week 11, his average depth of target, 18.4 yards. The week after that, 23.2 yards. And just this past week, 12.3. And that's using our utilization game logs available on the site with that lovely Tier 2 subscription, if you want to go ahead and check that out. But since he's streaking down the field on a week-to-week basis and he's going up against a defense that enables receivers to come down with those catches, having him in your lineup isn't the worst process given the amount of bye weeks, given the amount of ceiling folks are probably going to be looking for, given the injuries in players they're usually used to rostering they won't be able to have this week. So I can understand it. And of course, I mean, we'll go with the lame joke of you can't spell win without NWI, fellas.
Oh my God, how did I not hear that until now? That is fantastic. And accordingly, Chris, I need to adjust the ranks because I made a promise on Sunday night that I would rank Westbrook-Ikhine 1 spot higher than Dwayne. Right now, I'm at wide receiver 43. He's at wide receiver 38. So same ballpark, but I am a man of my word, and we will rectify that here soon enough. However, someone not dealing with as good of a matchup, Jets wide receiver 1, 2, whatever you want to call him, Garrett Wilson, going up against the Dolphins defense, Dwayne. That's allowed the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game in the position. And unfortunately, just looking at the Jets offense, hoping that they were going to round into form, during this final stretch. But man, last week, probably the worst game we've seen from Rodgers, in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, Rodgers hasn't gotten over 185 yards passing in the last 3 games. Now that could just come through as being a 3-game bad stretch. These things happen. Like mostly what we do in this industry is overreact to 3 and 4 game samples. Like people are all over the place. Like go look at what people were saying about fantasy football 8 weeks ago. It'll be what happened the 4 weeks before that. So we have to take it into account, though, because sometimes these trends do hold true and they don't correct themselves. Sometimes they prove to just be a lull. I'm not as worried about Garrett Wilson as I am as some people are. He's clearly taken a downgrade. Like if you look at his utilization since Davante Adams has joined this team, his utilization score has dropped from an 8.7 down to a 7.7. So obviously it's made an impact. Target share dropped from 27% down to 24% over that period. So that's still good when you've got a guy like Davante Adams on your team. Like Garrett Wilson's still clearly a good player, but now you've got a quarterback it's looking shaky. We don't know what he's going to do on a week-to-week basis. We know that there's a gross floor that could be in play, and you're having to share all these targets with a guy like Davante Adams. So that just makes it a little bit tougher on Garrett Wilson. Still, though, like if we're thinking about confidence intervals on all these guys that we've talked about, I would put Garrett Wilson right there as a low end to mid-range wide receiver 2 this week because he's still a very talented player. Ian, I think most likely we'll look back at this 3 to 4 week stretch and be like, oh, yeah, I remember the 3 to 4 games before this where he was awesome and he went back to being really good again. It's just a little bit tougher to predict which weeks because we don't know for sure if it's going to be Wilson or Adams that are going to go off or are they going to both negate each other. So the real key comes down to, can Aaron Rodgers come out here and throw for 250 yards? Like, if he can, both of these guys can succeed, and one of them would have a chance to have a really big game. So I would put his confidence interval at a 7. So a little bit lower than what we talked about with Guerendo earlier, which I said was a 7.5. And like to give you further reference, like Thielen, I would have it a 5. So well above Thielen, but not quite to where I had Guerendo.
Yeah. Can't feel great about the matchup this week. Chris, we get the Jaguars in week 15 and then the Rams in week 16. So please, Rodgers, start to figure it out so we can take advantage of those smashes here. But it's wild, man. Like, being here, probably used a, second round pick to get Garrett Wilson back in August, maybe even a late one. And at this point, Chris, not someone who exactly needs to be jammed in the lineups despite 6 teams being on bye.
No, but I would say, though, like to Dwain's point, the utilization has been there such that if we do get one of those matchups, and you noted we'll get one in the following week, we should have at least a bit more confidence for him. So I have my confidence levels around a 5-6. I mean, around like 26% of the targets over his last 2 games, and that's with Davante Adams. But I would say it's just the situation for him, the offensive environment for the Jets right now. 30th in yards per drive over the last 4 games. I mean, bottom 4 in EPA per play as well. So if Rodgers isn't figuring it out, I mean, that pie that we thought was going to be so large for either Wilson or Davante Adams, I mean, it really starts to shrink if the rest of the offense starts to fail around them.
Like, who are you guys benching, Garrett? Who are you guys benching Garrett Wilson for? Because like Chris said, Nick a 5, I said a 7. So we probably Westbrook. No way. I'm not benching Garrett Wilson for Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. I will. Yeah, no. That's too much potential for that to go way wrong. I can't do that. But are you serious though, Chris? You would start NWI over Garrett Wilson? Okay, all right. Because I'm sure people are wondering. I'm just bringing it up because I said 7, you said 5. So like, I'm starting Brian Thomas Jr. probably over him. Ian,
what about Khalil Shakir?
Tennessee. I have Khalil Shakir 2 spots behind Garrett, but same tier. Jameson Williams, I've got a spot behind Garrett Wilson. I've got Deebo Samuel slightly behind Garrett Wilson. I've got Jaden Reed slightly behind him. So there's some names people are going to like that I still have Garrett Wilson, above. The guy I have Ladd McConkey, which we're waiting on injury news there, above him. I've got Malik Neighbors above him. I've got Brian Thomas Jr. above him. Tennessee's really hurting in their secondary. They've been really good this year, but they've taken on a lot of injuries. I've got Tyreek Hill slightly above him, but like, that's his range. I'm still starting him over most guys. Like Keenan Allen, DJ Moore. You guys going to them?
No.
No.
Yeah, me neither. No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Garrett's still ahead of Jaden Reed, ahead of guys like Jalen Waddle, DeAndre Hopkins. So not a complete stay away, but, Dwain and I have him as wide receiver 23, both of us in this week. So still, not exactly living up to what we were hoping for, but again, maybe you can still squeeze him in there. Last one, guys. So I think we might have a little harder time squeezing in there, despite the good matchup on paper. Seahawks tight end and Chris's, favorite player for good reason. He's been doing good this year. Will Dissly. And here's the thing. We do look at the Chiefs, and even going back to week 1, Isaiah Likely and tight ends have been putting up big numbers. That said, I was a little bit, just wary of that because sometimes, these specific positions, it's more so about who you've played than them actually being horrible against tight ends. That said, though, Dwain, as we've seen the season go on, this Chiefs defense has gone from being arguably one of the best in the league to really functioning as one of the worst. Have the chart up right now, man. But really, again, since about week 9, that Buccaneers game, we've all of a sudden seen them allowing a positive EPA per play far more weeks than not, after again really playing well to start the year. So maybe it's a mix of the defense slowing down or just the offense not doing as good a job of setting them up. But what do you make of this matchup here, Chris, and Dwain, and by Seahawks tight end Will Dissly? Of course, I meant the Chargers the entire time.
Yeah, I know. The Seahawks let him get away. They should have talked to Chris Allen before they let that happen. He would have told them they need to re-up this dude better than Noah Fant. That's for sure. And so like looking at the EPA, to your point, Ian, like the concerning part here is like this multi-week trend, right, that we have going on where they have now been, a much easier matchup. EPA on a week-to-week basis, it's not very sticky, right? Just like most data points. But once you get to a 3 or 4 week sample, it does become a little bit more sticky. So there's definitely something going on here with the Chiefs defense. It's a matter of, though, can they get it corrected? Because we talked about this so many times. Everything is a punch and a counter punch, and a lot of it's based on film. I do think it's time that the Chiefs are going to have to figure out, okay, look, we were doing really well. Now teams have figured out this counterpunch to what we're doing. Like, what is our counterpunch to that? What's the wrinkle that we've got to add in that they're not expecting? It's like when you hear a boxer talking, Ian, and they come out and, the first round, they're just trying to set up their first punch. The next round, they're trying to set up the second punch. By the third round, you got to have a third punch, because now your opponent knows what the 1-2 combo is. And I feel like that's kind of where the Chiefs are right now as far as their defense. So I think that we will get a rebound from them. We don't have a ton of injuries on their team to like star players that would make us think that that's, because sometimes when you see that, it's not reversible. When you lose your stars, it can become really problematic to try to fix the defense. So I still think that it's probably okay. I know ultimately this is to wrap all the way back around to Will Dissly, but I should just throw it to Chris, because Will Dissly is Chris's guy. Chris, I think, is officially, you're his agent now. I know Ian's got Cordarrelle Patterson, Duke Johnson. Yeah. I figure Will Dissly is now yours. You're representing him. But yeah, I look at him as a low-end tight end one. Man, if Ladd McConkey's not available for some reason, that is going to move Will Dissly up. He has earned a respectable target share since taking over as the starter. And Ian, I thought you made a great point that people shouldn't forget, especially at tight end, guys. It really comes back to who the teams have placed. I honestly don't really use, so even in the articles, you'll notice, and I love our tools, I don't talk about DVP for tight ends, because there's a very few amount of really good tight ends in the league, and it does come down to which ones you've played. I talk about it a lot more for wide receivers and running backs and quarterbacks, and it's because of what Ian just said. The tight end position, I mostly just look at how many yards are they giving up per game through the air, those sort of things.
Yeah. Chris, I have Will Dissly, tight end 12. Dwayne has tight end 13. You have him tight end 1?
Tight end 0, actually. Tight end 0. Like, he should just automatically be in your roster regardless. But I would say to Dwayne's point, I mean, for a lot of the tight end usage for, like, at least regarding our DVP tool, yep, I'm completely with you. I mean, without knowing like which tight ends they've played against, it's a tough out in order to say that this is more predictive or how well the future tight ends is going to be, like, going up against the whichever defense you want to try and target. But looking over the past like 5 to 6 weeks, I mean, the Chiefs have played some good tight ends. I mean, watch Brock Bowers dust them off twice in the last 6 weeks or so. I mean, from a fantasy standpoint, double-digit outings for Brock Bowers in both of them. George Kittle, 15 PPR points. Even Dawson Knox got in there for about like 6 or 7 catches for around 40 yards. So it's like outside of your normal, like, I know when they played against the Panthers, I mean, it was Tommy Tremble, so we didn't care too much about that. But they have played some good tight ends over the last month or so, and all of them have come out ahead from a fantasy standpoint. So if we get some of that condensing of targets around like Will Dissly with Ladd McConkey potentially limited, it's not like we're looking to Quentin Johnston for receiving production. So for coming up like for this weekend, like, Will Dissly being in the tight end 1 or being in the tight end 1 ranks, I mean, completely makes sense to me. And that's just not just coming from me as the biased Will Dissly guy. The matchup and also the usage lines up for him. And I'm not too concerned about the week 13 results. I mean, Justin Herbert with around like less than 150 passing yards. That's first time since week 3 we've seen that type of result from him. I think in this matchup, we see him take to the air a bit more, and it's Will Dissly catching some more of those targets for week 14.
Going to be waiting all day for that Sunday night matchup. Please be healthy, Ladd McConkey. But man, if not, again, maybe it will be Will Dissly's season. But that's going to do it from us today, everyone. Dwayne, myself, and the great Matthew Friedman. We'll be back tomorrow breaking down some of the biggest rankings questions and start-sit questions of the week. So make sure you're back for that. But otherwise, just have a great rest of your Wednesday, because football's around the corner and we are excited about that. So for Chris, for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.